Are blood types distinguished in animals as well? At the beginning of the 20th century, transfusion is still something like a lottery. Until Czech Dr. Jan Jansky publishes the discovery of 4 main blood types, A, B, AB, O. But what about animals? Can we give them any blood during surgery, for example? Animals also have different blood types, and some even more than humans. For example, in dogs 3 main types are distinguished, but in total we know 13. Cats have 3 blood types, A, B, and AB. Horses have 8, A, C, D, K, P, Q, U, and T, and a greater number is also distinguished in cows. On the other hand, ferrets have no differences in their blood. And what happens if a dog receives a different blood type during a transfusion? Usually nothing the first time, because its immune system produces antibodies only later. During a second possible transfusion, when the body already has antibodies, it becomes a serious problem. However, the knowledge of animal blood types is also used in other ways. For example, to verify the origin of horses or to choose parents for future offspring. Why are airplanes white? Even though there are of course exceptions, there's no doubt about the most common color of airplanes. But why was white chosen for them? For example, it's because white reflects light best, less thermal energy gets inside. And it's easier to maintain a comfortable climate on board. White is also said to be more visible to birds. According to some scientific studies, birds crash into dark airplanes or obstacles during flight significantly more often. Damage to the fuselage is also easier to detect on white, when a crack, another defect, or corrosion appears, it usually doesn't escape the attention of technicians. White color is also definitely easier to maintain in the case of airplanes. Bold shades fade quickly in the sun. And the paint would need to be reapplied often. And since covering the entire fuselage can take up to 300 liters of paint, it would increase the weight of the aircraft, its fuel consumption, and operating costs. White always stays nicely white, and on top of that, company names and airline logos stand out on it beautifully. How long does it take for all the cells in the body to be replaced? Nothing lasts forever. However, human life at least lasts a bit longer than the individual cells that make up every organism. Some die, others are created. So at regular intervals we essentially become a new person. How long does such a renewal take? The number of cells in the human body is roughly estimated at 50 trillion. Each one has a predetermined lifespan. A red blood cell lives about 4 months, a skin cell 2 to 3 weeks. A colon cell perhaps only 4 days. A few years ago, Israeli scientists calculated that 330 billion cells are created in the human body each day, which is 3.8 million every second. If we take it purely theoretically, the same number of cells from which the body is made is created in 150 days. But becoming a new person is more complicated. About 86% of the newly produced cells are always those in the blood. Also, with age, the speed of regeneration naturally slows down. And last but not least, there are cells in the brain or in the heart that do not renew at all. Which language is the fastest in the world? Some people say everything immediately, others speak slowly, and at such length that you almost fall asleep. Of course, it depends on personality, but also a bit on one's native language. Where in the world is speech generally the fastest? When we want to measure the speed of a language, we count the syllables spoken per second. When this method is used by a team of 3 scientists from the National Center for Scientific Research in Paris, Christophe Coupé, Egidio Marsico, and François Pellegrino. They named Japanese as the winner. Its speakers managed to spit out an incredible 7.84 syllables per second. However, the amount of information doesn't quite match the quantity. The words are long, so in that 1 second, we don't learn that much from a Japanese speaker. On the other hand, Standard Chinese is in no rush. The slowest measured language fits only 5.18 syllables into a single second. Who determined the paper format? Place office paper bought in Spain, Germany, France, or most other countries side by side. They are all the same size. Who chose this particular format and why? In history, paper formats were different. They were based on the width of the screen of a particular papermaking machine. In Central Europe, things were still chaotic during the reign of Maria Theresa, when around 16 formats were allowed. In Germany, however, the so-called Reich format, 330 by 420 millimeters, became the most widely adopted in the 19th century. From this, by having a small adjustment, the A4 format we know today was born. This led to the creation of the international ISO standard, which was adopted by most countries in the middle of the last century. And why are the dimensions what they are? For A4, it is 210 by 297 millimeters. The aspect ratio is therefore 1 to 1.4142, or 1 to the square root of 2. And that's certainly no coincidence. Because every time you fold the paper in half, the aspect ratio remains the same. This is also called the gate of harmony. This way, the A5, A6, and other formats are gradually created. Where does milk get its white color from? Cows, just like sheep or goats, feed mainly on green food. The milk they produce is a mixture of fats, the protein casein, calcium compounds, and a variety of vitamins. But none of these components is white in color. So where does milk get it from? More precisely, milk contains about 87% water, in which the mentioned compounds are dissolved. However, not completely. Milk fat and milk protein dissolve rather poorly. If you looked at a drop of milk under a microscope, instead of a uniform white smear, you would see a flood of small spheres. Each is covered with a firm membrane that effectively prevents them from clumping together. So when light rays hit the milk, they encounter an endless number of these surfaces and scatter in many directions. All the wavelengths are therefore evenly dispersed, none are absorbed. And the result of combining all the color components is snow white. Does the distance between the Earth and the Sun change over time? It's quite a journey, 150 million kilometers. Due to the elliptical orbit, the distance between the Earth and the Sun changes slightly during the year, but it always returns to the same values. Or are they not exactly the same? Very, very slowly, the Earth is moving away from the Sun. Because of the solar wind, which blows away a large number of particles, the mass of our star is slightly decreasing. And so it exerts less and less gravitational force on the planet. Tidal forces also play a role, the mutual interaction of the Sun, the Moon, and the Earth, because of which the Moon is also slowly escaping from us. The Moon causes tides on Earth, slows down the Earth's rotation, and lengthens the day. As a result, it actually speeds up and moves away from its current orbit by about 4 centimeters per year. Similar things are happening between the Earth and the Sun. But the size difference between these bodies is quite a lot greater. So the Earth's escape from the Sun is negligible. Why do rivers originate in the mountains? To be precise, river sources can also be found in lowlands. However, most of them originate in mountainous areas. Why did nature come up with it this way? A river source is a place where underground water naturally emerges to the surface. It therefore depends on the conditions present in the inner layers of the soil. In mountainous areas, the geological composition is often varied and rugged, so water more easily encounters obstacles that force it out. If an underground spring does come to the surface, it also has a better chance in the mountains of not remaining just a pond or a swamp, but becoming a river. That's because water flows downward, thanks to gravity. There is also more precipitation, less water evaporates, and at the same time, the landscape here is less affected by humans. In economically used lowlands, many springs that could have turned into rivers eventually dried up. Why do some people faint at the sight of blood? Many people have a clear reason why they couldn't become a doctor. They can't stand the sight of blood. Or, in a worse case, as soon as they see blood, they immediately collapse to the ground. But blood is a vital, life-giving fluid, so why does the sight of it bother us so much? Even tough individuals can become completely helpless in that moment. They turn pale, start to sweat, feel dizzy, their arms go limp, and they fall to the ground. It's enough just to see someone bleeding. This reaction is caused by a reflex in our brain, which at that moment feels like we ourselves have lost blood. And so it switches into so-called saving mode. The heart rate drops, breathing slows, and blood pressure falls. The brain gets less oxygen. And that's why dizziness and nausea appear, which can even lead to fainting. In other words, our thinking organ is overly afraid, but means well. Its proper reflexes often help us survive. Would balloons filled with vacuum be able to fly? Balloons filled with air don't fly. We have to fill them with helium, which is lighter than air. But vacuum is also lighter than air. If we managed to fill a balloon with a vacuum, would it fly too? How does a balloon actually fly? It's caused by the buoyant force acting on an object in a fluid or gas. The same applies in water and in air. And because, according to Archimedes' principle, the buoyant force acting on the balloon is equal to the weight of the air displaced by the balloon including its envelope simply has to be lighter than air in order to float. The equation is simple. A liter of air weighs about 1.25 grams, a liter of helium only 0.18 grams. And a perfect vacuum weighs nothing. So a vacuum balloon would fly the best. The problem, however, is that filling a balloon with a vacuum is not an easy task. And it would also have to be made from a solid material that could withstand atmospheric pressure and prevent the vacuum from collapsing. Such a material would be heavy, which would increase the weight of the balloon. So it would have to be really large in order for the vacuum's volume to outweigh the envelope's mass. So, in theory it would work, but the solution is impractical.